This is HOA busted. The envelope date did not match the story. You can appeal after I file it. Karen, no. Janet Nelson, the Silverleaf Landing Association president, shoved a backdated notice at my face and yelled that the date was the date and I should have known. The paper had yesterday's date, but I had never seen it until this second. She stood on my driveway at 6:30 in the morning holding a plastic evidence sleeve like it was a federal warrant. I am an auto mechanic. I work early mornings. I was heading to the shop when she blocked my truck door. The notice claimed I violated a landscaping rule on a date 2 weeks ago, but the wording in the notice did not match the online portal version I checked last month. I asked her to show me where the rule came from. She smiled and said, "I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes." I kept my voice low because my trump card needed perfect timing. But I did not have it yet. I had suspicion and a memory of another neighbor who got railroaded 2 years ago with the same tactics. Same impossible deadline. Same backdated envelope. Same smug tone. Janet tapped the plastic sleeve against my windshield. I have all day, and so does my fine meter. She said it like she was clocking in for a shift. The Silverleaf Landing Association operates in Syracuse, New York, where the rules are used as leverage, not guidance. This is a neighborhood where every bush height and mailbox color gets weaponized if you make the wrong enemy. I moved here 3 years ago because it was affordable and close to the shop. I thought the HOA was normal paperwork stuff. I was wrong. Janet wore a white windbreaker with the hood pushed back, a gray sun hat perched on top, and she kept a bundle of zip ties clipped to her belt like she was field ready for sign enforcement. Her blonde hair was pulled into a sleek low ponytail that somehow stayed perfect even when she was yelling. She had a bundle of zip ties she brandished for a sign stand, waving them like a weapon every time she wanted to emphasize a point. I wore my usual red polo shirt and red baseball cap, both shop-branded, and I had grabbed my roll of caution tape from the truck bed that morning because I was planning to mark off a busted oil pan zone at work. Now it was looped over my wrist like an accessory, and Janet kept glancing at it like I was mocking her. I asked her to explain the date discrepancy. She said the portal is not official, only printed notices count, and I should have known to check my mailbox daily. I check my mailbox daily. This notice was not there yesterday. Janet leaned in close. Then maybe you need to check more often. The deadline is today. You have until 5 p.m. to submit compliance photos and a written statement in the format outlined in the enforcement packet, or the fine escalates to $200 and we move to a hearing. I asked what format. She waved the plastic sleeve again. The format is in the packet. If you do not have the packet, that is a you problem. I did not receive a packet. Janet sighed like I was a child refusing to do homework. I mailed it. Check your records. This was escalation step 1. A demand for proof in a format they never mentioned until today. I had no packet, no format guide, and a 5 p.m. deadline that gave me less than 11 hours to figure it out while working a full day at the shop. I got in my truck and drove to work. I spent the morning under a Civic trying to think through the strategy. My neighbor, a retired police officer named Ed Campos, had warned me about Janet 6 months ago. He said she ran the HOA like a quota system, always hitting monthly fine goals, always finding violations right before board elections. He told me to document everything because one day she would come for me. That day was today. At lunch, I drove to the county records office and requested copies of the Silverleaf Landing Association bylaws and enforcement policies. The clerk handed me a stack, and I paid the copy fee. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and flipped through the pages. The landscaping rule Janet cited was in there, but the wording was different from the version on the portal. Someone had quietly changed the online rule wording after they cited it against me. I took photos of both versions with my phone. I made a note of the revision date on the county copy. It was 8 months old. The portal version had no revision date visible, but the metadata in the page source showed it was edited 2 weeks ago, the same week as my alleged violation date. I called Ed. He answered on the second ring. "Ed, I need your help. Janet hit me with a backdated notice and the rules do not match." He said, "She did the same thing to Marcus 2 years ago. Marcus lived 3 doors down. He got a notice for a fence stain color, same backdated envelope, same impossible deadline. He could not prove it was backdated and he lost the hearing. Janet fined him into selling his house." I asked Ed if he still had any of Marcus's paperwork. Ed said he might. He told me to come by after work. At 5 p.m. I clocked out and drove straight to Ed's house. He was waiting on his porch with a manila folder. Inside were copies of Marcus's notices, hearing minutes, and a spreadsheet Marcus had made tracking every fine and deadline. The dates did not line up. Marcus had documented receiving his first notice 3 days after the alleged violation, but the notice itself was dated the day before the violation even happened. I asked Ed if he ever reported it. He said Marcus tried. The board ignored him. Janet controlled the meeting minutes and the record's custodian was her sister-in-law. Every document request Marcus filed got delayed or denied. By the time he had enough proof, he was already in collections. I looked at the spreadsheet again. There was a column labeled monthly fine total, and every month hit almost the exact same number, around $1,800. It was too clean. It looked like a quota. Ed tapped the page. "She is doing it again. You need to build a case before she buries you." I took photos of everything. I asked Ed if he would testify if it came to a hearing. He said yes. He also said Janet hates witnesses. That night I logged into the Silverleaf Landing Association portal to upload my compliance photos. I had trimmed the bushes that afternoon even though I was not sure what the actual rule was. I took time-stamped photos from every angle. I wrote a statement explaining the discrepancy and attached both versions of the rule with sources. I clicked Submit. The portal froze. Then it refreshed and showed an error, file not found. I tried again. Same error. I checked my email. There was a message from Janet, time-stamped 15 minutes earlier. The portal is undergoing maintenance. All submissions must be delivered in person to the management office by 5 p.m. today. It was 8:30 p.m. I had missed the deadline by 3.5 hours because the portal suddenly deletes my uploads, and the timestamp is the same hour Janet emailed me. I called the management office. No answer. I left a voicemail explaining what happened and asking for an extension. The next morning I got an email from the management company. It said my appeal was denied due to late submission. The fine was now $200 and a hearing was scheduled for next week. If I wanted to dispute it, I needed to submit a formal records request for all enforcement documents related to my case, pay a copy fee of 50 cents per page, and wait 30 days for processing. This was escalation step 2. A retaliatory records denial unless I pay ridiculous copy fees and wait 30 days. I could not wait 30 days. The hearing was in 6 days. I drove to the management office that morning before work. It was a small brick building in a strip mall 2 miles from the neighborhood. The office manager, a tired-looking woman named Diane, sat behind a desk stacked with binders. I explained the situation and asked if I could submit my compliance photos now. Diane said the deadline was firm. Policy is policy. I asked to see the enforcement packet Janet mentioned. Diane frowned. What packet? The one that outlines the submission format. She looked confused. We do not have a standard packet for landscaping violations. Each notice should have instructions. I showed her my notice. It had no instructions beyond a deadline. Diane sighed. That is not correct. Let me check the file. She pulled a binder from the stack and flipped through it. She stopped on a page and her face changed. This says your violation was reported on the 15th, but the notice is dated the 14th. That is not right. I said, that is what I am trying to tell you. Diane looked uncomfortable. I cannot change anything without board approval. You will have to bring it up at the hearing. I asked if I could request copies of the file now. She said yes, but the records custodian, Janet's sister-in-law, was out this week, and nobody else was authorized to process requests. I would have to wait. This was the side complication. The records custodian claims the file is confidential and refuses to let me photograph anything. I could not get the documents I needed to defend myself because the person controlling access was related to the person attacking me. I left the office and called Ed again. I told him what Diane said. Ed laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Janet has been doing this for years. She controls the records, she controls the minutes, she controls the hearing. You need something she cannot control. I asked him what that would be. He said, proof she is lying. On camera. In front of people she cannot intimidate. That gave me an idea. I went home and checked my doorbell camera footage. I have a camera that saves clips to the cloud whenever it detects motion. I scrolled back to the day of the alleged violation. Nothing. No landscaping crew, no inspector, no Janet. The bushes looked the same all day. I scrolled back further. 2 nights before the alleged violation, at 11:40 p.m., the camera caught Janet walking up my driveway. She stopped at my porch, looked directly at the camera, stepped to the side and placed something on my doormat. Then she walked back to her car. I saved the clip. The next morning, I checked the doormat footage from that night. The envelope she placed was visible for 3 frames before the camera angle cut off. It was a standard white envelope, no markings. I went back to the footage from the morning of the alleged violation. I watched myself leave for work at 6 a.m. The envelope was gone. There was no notice in my mailbox that day either. I checked the mailbox camera angle. Nothing. Janet had placed the notice 2 nights early, removed it before I could see it, then backdated the violation to create a paper trail that made me look non-compliant. This was evidence. A doorbell clip showing Janet peeking at my porch camera before placing the notice. It was time-stamped. It was her face, her car, her actions. I burned the clip to a USB drive and made 3 copies. I put 1 in my truck, 1 in my toolbox at work, and 1 in a safe deposit box at the bank. I was not taking chances. Ed called me that afternoon. He said Janet was doing a neighborhood patrol in her golf cart, driving past houses and taking photos of mailboxes and trash cans. She had done it to Marcus too, always the week before a hearing. She was building her case. I asked Ed if he could document it. He said he was already on it. He had his phone ready. That evening, Janet drove slowly past my house in a golf cart. I was in my garage working on my truck. She stopped at the curb and took photos of my front yard with her phone. She did not say anything. She just sat there, aiming her phone, clicking, moving to a new angle. I walked to the end of my driveway and held up my phone. I started recording. Janet looked at me. You cannot record me. This is harassment. I said, you are on a public street taking photos of my property. I am allowed to document it. She said, I am conducting official HOA business. I said, then you will not mind if I have a record of it. She glared at me, then drove off. I sent the video to Ed. He replied with a thumbs up and a note. She did this to Marcus 17 times in 2 weeks. She is trying to intimidate you into backing down. I was not backing down. The hearing was in 4 days. I spent every evening after work building my case. I printed the doorbell footage stills. I printed the rule comparison with sources. I printed Marcus's spreadsheet. I printed the timeline showing the portal went down the same hour Janet emailed me. I organized everything into a 3-ring binder with tabbed sections. I made copies for the board and for Diane. Ed stopped by the night before the hearing. He brought a witness, a landscaping contractor named Miguel, who had worked in the neighborhood for 10 years. Miguel said he had seen Janet place notices on doors after hours multiple times. He said she once tried to hire him to document violations for her, but he refused because it felt like a setup. He agreed to come to the hearing and testify if I needed him. I thanked him. I asked Ed what to expect. Ed said the board would try to rush it. Janet would talk over me. Diane would stay neutral. The other board members, 2 older men who barely showed up, would vote however Janet wanted because she controlled the meeting minutes and the budget. My only chance was to present so much evidence so fast that they could not ignore it. I asked Ed if he thought I could win. He said, "You can make it expensive for her to keep lying." That was good enough. The hearing was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. I arrived at 6:45. Janet was already there, sitting at a folding table with a stack of binders and her plastic evidence sleeve. The 2 other board members, Ron and Steve, sat beside her looking bored. Diane sat at a side table with a laptop. There were about 15 neighbors in the folding chairs, including Ed and Miguel. A few I recognized. Most I did not. Janet saw me and smiled. "Glad you could make it. Do you have your statement prepared?" I said I did. She said, "You have 5 minutes. We have a full agenda tonight." I sat down in the front row and set my binder on my lap. Ed sat beside me. Miguel sat 1 row back. Janet started the meeting by reading the violation notice aloud, emphasizing the date and the deadline. She said I had failed to comply and failed to submit documentation on time. She recommended the fine be upheld and increased to $300 for non-compliance and disrespect of process. Ron and Steve nodded. Diane looked uncomfortable. Janet turned to me. "Do you have anything to say?" I stood up and opened my binder. I handed copies to Diane, Ron, and Steve. Janet did not get one. She frowned. I said, "I have evidence that the notice was backdated, the rule was changed after the violation date, and the portal was taken offline to prevent me from submitting compliance." Janet laughed. "That is a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" I turned to the first tab. Doorbell footage. Time-stamped. It shows you placing an envelope on my porch 2 nights before the alleged violation date, then removing it before I could see it. I handed Diane the USB drive. She plugged it into her laptop and projected it on the wall screen. The room went silent as the clip played. Janet walking up the driveway. Janet looking at the camera. Janet placing the envelope. Janet walking away. Ron leaned forward. "Is that you, Janet?" Janet said, "That proves nothing. I was delivering a courtesy reminder." I said, "A courtesy reminder dated 2 days in the future?" Steve said, "That does not make sense." Janet said, "The date on the notice is the violation date, not the delivery date. That is standard procedure." I turned to the next tab. Rule comparison. The county bylaws version says bushes must be trimmed below 4 feet. The portal version, edited 2 weeks ago, says bushes must be trimmed below 3 feet. My bushes were 3.5 feet. Under the original rule, I was compliant. Diane looked at her screen. "I can confirm the portal version was edited recently. I can see the changelog here." Janet said, "The portal is not official. The county bylaws are official." I said, "Then under the official rule I was compliant and this violation is invalid." Ron said, That sounds right. Janet's face went red. The board has the authority to update rules as needed. The new version applies retroactively. I said, retroactive enforcement is illegal under New York property law. You cannot penalize someone for violating a rule that did not exist when the alleged violation occurred. Steve said, "Is that true?" Diane nodded slowly. "I think it is." Janet stood up. "This is ridiculous. You are wasting everyone's time with technicalities." I said, "These are not technicalities. These are your violations." Ed stood up. "I want to add something. 2 years ago, Janet did the same thing to Marcus Chen. Same backdated notice. Same impossible deadline. Same portal outage. Marcus lost his house because he could not fight it. I have his documentation here if anyone wants to see it." A neighbor in the back row stood up. "She did it to me too, last year. Trash can placement. The notice was dated before I even put the trash out." Another neighbor stood up. "She threatened to tow my car for expired registration, but my registration was current. She just did not like where I parked." Janet said, "This is not a forum for complaints. We are here to discuss his violation." Miguel stood up. "I am a licensed contractor. I have worked in this neighborhood for 10 years. I have seen Miss Nelson place notices after hours and then backdate them. I refused to work with her because it was unethical." The room erupted. Neighbors started talking over each other. Janet tried to gavel the meeting back to order, but she did not have a gavel. She slammed her plastic evidence sleeve on the table instead. Ron said, "Janet, this is a problem." Janet said, "This is a coordinated attack. They are lying." I said, "I have timestamps, metadata, and witnesses. If I am lying, report me to the police." Diane said, "I think we need to table this and conduct an internal review." Janet said, "We do not need a review. We need to enforce the rules." Steve said, "Janet, if the rule was changed after the violation date, we cannot enforce it. That is basic fairness." Ron said, "I agree. I move to dismiss the violation and refund any fees paid." Steve said, "Second." Janet said, "You cannot do that without my approval." Ron said, "We just did." The vote was 2-1. Janet voted against. Ron and Steve voted to dismiss. Janet stood up and walked out. She did not say anything. She just grabbed her binders and left. The room stayed loud for another 10 minutes. Neighbors came up to me and thanked me. Ed shook my hand. Miguel said he was glad someone finally stood up to her. Diane pulled me aside. She said, "I am sorry. I did not know it was this bad. I am going to recommend the management company conduct a full audit of enforcement actions under Janet's tenure. If we find a pattern, we will refer it to the state." I said, "Thank you." She said, "You should also file a complaint with the county. What she did is fraud." I said I would. I went home that night and slept better than I had in weeks. But it was not over. The next morning, Janet sent an email to the entire neighborhood. It said I had disrupted a lawful hearing, slandered the board, and created a hostile environment. She said she was filing a defamation claim and pursuing legal action for damages. Ed called me. He said, "She is bluffing. She has nothing." I said, "I know, but I am tired of this." Ed said, "Then finish it." I asked him what he meant. He said, "You have the evidence. You have the witnesses. You have the video. Go to the county and file a formal complaint. Let them investigate. If they find fraud, she loses her position and possibly faces charges. If they do not, at least you tried." I thought about it. Then I called a lawyer. His name was Dan Ortiz. He specialized in HOA disputes. I explained everything over the phone. He said it sounded like a clear case of procedural fraud and selective enforcement. He offered to represent me for a flat fee. I said yes. Dan filed the complaint with the county the next day. He also sent a cease and desist letter to Janet, demanding she stop all enforcement actions against me and retract her defamation email. He copied the management company, the board, and the state attorney general's office. Janet did not respond. 2 weeks later, the county opened an investigation. They requested all HOA records related to enforcement actions over the past 3 years. The management company complied. Diane told me later that the record's custodian, Janet's sister-in-law, resigned the same day the request came in. The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, Janet stayed quiet. No emails, no patrol drives, no notices. The neighborhood felt lighter. Then the report came out. The county found that Janet had issued over 200 violations in 3 years, and at least 40% of them were backdated, miscategorized, or based on rules that did not exist at the time of the alleged violation. The report also found that Janet had altered meeting minutes to remove dissenting votes, and that she had received kickbacks from the towing company the HOA used for parking enforcement. The kicker was a hidden spreadsheet the county found on the HOA server. It tracked monthly fine totals and included a column labeled goal. Every month, the goal was $1,800. Every month, Janet hit it. Dan called me when the report was released. He said, "You were right. She was running a quota system. This is fraud. The state is reviewing it for potential criminal charges." I asked what happened next. He said the board had 2 options: remove Janet immediately or face liability for enabling her. They voted to remove her that night. The vote was unanimous. Ron and Steve apologized to the neighborhood in a public letter. Janet tried to fight it. She hired a lawyer and filed an appeal. The appeal was denied. She filed a second appeal, also denied. The management company terminated her access to the HOA systems and changed all the locks on the clubhouse. Janet sent one final email to the neighborhood. It said, "I have all day, and so does my fine meter. This is not over." But it was. The state attorney general filed charges 3 months later: fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of office. Janet pled no contest and agreed to pay restitution to every homeowner she had fined improperly. The total was over $60,000. She was also banned from serving on any HOA board in New York for 10 years. Marcus got his money back. So did the neighbor with the trash can violation. So did I. The management company issued a formal apology and implemented new policies. All notices must include photographic evidence. All rule changes require 30 days' notice and a recorded vote. And all enforcement actions must be reviewed by an independent third party before fines are assessed. Ed was elected HOA president in the next election. His first act was to abolish the fine quota system and cap penalties at $50 for first violations. The neighborhood group chat, which had been silent for years, came back to life. People started organizing events again: block parties, holiday decorations, a community garden. I kept the evidence binder in my truck for months, just in case. But I never needed it again. One afternoon, about a year after the hearing, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up. It was Diane. She got out holding a folder. She said, "I wanted to give you this in person. It is the final audit report. The management company found 12 other HOAs where Janet had used the same tactics. They are all under investigation now. You started something." I said, "I just wanted her to stop." Diane said, "You did more than that. You exposed a system. Thank you." She handed me the folder and left. Inside was a letter from the management company. It thanked me for my diligence and enclosed a check for $300, reimbursement for the legal fees and time I spent fighting the bogus violation. I donated it to the community garden fund. Ed stopped by that evening with a six-pack. We sat on my porch and talked about everything that had happened. He said he was proud of me. He said Marcus would have been proud too. Marcus had moved to Arizona after he lost his house. Ed said he called Marcus after the charges were filed, and Marcus cried on the phone. I asked Ed if he ever thought it would go this far. He said, "I knew someone would stop her eventually. I am glad it was you." I said, "I could not have done it without you." He said, "That is what neighbors are for." We sat there until the sun went down. The neighborhood was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels safe. A few weeks later, I got a call from a reporter. She was writing a story about HOA abuse and she wanted to interview me. I said no. She asked why. I said because it was not about me. It was about the system. She said that was exactly why people needed to hear it. I thought about it. Then I said yes. The story ran in the local paper a month later. It included interviews with Marcus, the trash can neighbor, and Miguel. It included excerpts from the county report and photos of the hidden spreadsheet. It did not include my name. I had asked the reporter to keep me anonymous. She honored that. The story got picked up by a statewide news site, then a national HOA reform blog, then a property rights advocacy group. Within 6 months, New York passed new legislation requiring HOA boards to undergo ethics training and limiting their enforcement authority. Janet's lawyer sent me a letter threatening defamation charges. Dan responded with a letter reminding her that truth is an absolute defense and that all the information in the story came from public records. I never heard from her again. The neighborhood threw a party when the legislation passed. Ed gave a speech. He thanked everyone who had fought back against unfair enforcement. He said the new law would not have happened without people like us standing up. He did not mention my name, but he looked at me when he said it. I stayed in the back and ate a burger. That night, I went home and pulled out the evidence binder. I flipped through the tabs one last time. The doorbell footage, the rule comparison, the spreadsheet, the timeline. It all felt like ancient history now. I put the binder in a box in the attic. I did not need it anymore. But I kept the USB drives, just in case. Years passed. Janet disappeared from public records. Ed served 2 terms as HOA president and then stepped down to let someone younger take over. Miguel's landscaping business grew. Diane moved to a different management company. Marcus never moved back, but he visited once and thanked me in person. I stayed in Silverleaf Landing. I still work early mornings at the shop. I still check my doorbell camera footage every few days. I still keep copies of everything. But the neighborhood is different now. The rules are clearer. The enforcement is fair. The board is elected by people who actually care. And when someone new moves in, Ed or I will walk over and give them a welcome packet. It includes the bylaws, the contact info for the management company, and a note that says, "Document everything. Know your rights. Do not let anyone intimidate you." It also includes a printed copy of the county report, with a sticky note that says, "This is what happens when one person decides the rules do not apply to them." We have not had a single backdated notice since. One morning, about 3 years after the hearing, I was pulling out of my driveway when I saw a woman standing by the mailbox cluster. She was new. I had seen the moving truck a few days earlier. She was holding an envelope and looking confused. I rolled down my window and asked if she needed help. She said, "I just got this notice from the HOA. It says I violated a parking rule, but I was not even here on the date they listed. Is this normal?" I smiled. It used to be. I told her to come by my house later. I said I would explain everything and give her some resources. She said, "Thank you. I was starting to think I made a mistake moving here." I said, "You did not. We fixed it." She looked relieved. I gave her my number and told her to call if she had any trouble. She said she would. I drove to work thinking about how far the neighborhood had come. It was not perfect. There were still disputes. There were still fines. But they were fair now. They followed the rules. And if they did not, people knew how to fight back. That afternoon, the new neighbor called. She said the notice was bogus. The date was before she moved in. She asked what she should do. I told her to document it. Take photos. Check the bylaws. Request a hearing. And if they tried to intimidate her, call me. She said, they already dismissed it. The management company called and apologized. They said it was a data entry error. I said, good. That is how it is supposed to work. She said, I heard you are the reason things changed here. I said, I am one of the reasons. But it took a lot of people. She said, well, thank you. I feel safer now. I said, that is the point. I still see Ed most weeks. We still sit on my porch and talk. We still joke about Janet and her plastic evidence sleeve. We still keep the evidence binders in our attics. But mostly, we just enjoy the quiet. The kind of quiet where you do not have to check your mailbox 3 times a day. The kind of quiet where you do not have to record every interaction. The kind of quiet where the rules are tools, not weapons. That is what we fought for. And that is what we got. The trump card I kept holding back, the one I teased in my head every time Janet escalated, was the neighbor's doorbell video showing Karen trespassing at night near my property. I had that clip from the start, but I knew if I used it too early she would just dismiss it or claim she had a legitimate reason. I needed the perfect moment. That moment came during the hearing, when she was already on the defensive about the backdated notice. When I revealed the footage showing her placing the envelope 2 nights early and then removing it before I could see it, it was not just proof of trespassing, it was proof of intent. It was proof of a system. And once that video played on the screen in front of the board and the neighbors, everything else fell apart for her. She could not explain it away. She could not intimidate the witnesses. She could not control the narrative anymore. I use it to trigger an internal audit, and the board panics in real time. The footage became the cornerstone of the county investigation, and it was the reason the state attorney general moved forward with charges. The payoff came in stages. First, a city inspector confirming what the HOA cannot enforce became the final nail when the county report was released and the state weighed in. The inspector validated that the retroactive rule enforcement was illegal, and that gave the county the leverage to recommend criminal charges. Second, the HOA retracts the enforcement action in writing, which happened within 24 hours of the hearing vote. Ron and Steve issued a formal letter dismissing the violation and refunding all fees. Third, Karen's credibility collapses in front of witnesses, which happened live during the hearing when the doorbell footage played and the neighbors started standing up to share their own stories. She tried to maintain control, but the room turned on her. She walked out, and she never recovered. The funny karma beat came a few months later during a neighborhood meeting where Janet tried to make a surprise appearance to defend herself. She stood up to speak, holding her phone with notes, and mid-rant, Karen's phone dies mid-rant and she freezes in place. The screen went black. She stood there, mouth open, unable to finish her sentence, and the room went silent. Then someone in the back laughed. Then someone else. Then everyone. She left without another word. Ed told me later it was the most satisfying moment he had ever witnessed. I never saw Janet again after that. She moved out of the neighborhood within a year. The house sold fast. The new owners were a young couple with a dog. They asked me about the HOA, I told them it was fine now. They seemed relieved. Ed retired from the board after 2 terms, but he stayed active. He still walks the neighborhood most mornings. He still answers questions from new residents. He still keeps copies of the county report in his garage, just in case someone needs to see it. Miguel's business is thriving. He hired 3 new employees last year. He told me he gets calls from other neighborhoods now, people asking if he has seen HOA abuse in their communities. He always says the same thing: document everything, know your rights, and do not back down. Diane moved to a different management company, but she still checks in once in a while. She said the changes we pushed for have become standard practice across the state. She said other HOAs are adopting the same transparency policies. She said it is making a difference. Marcus never moved back, but he visits every year. He brings his family. He walks the neighborhood and smiles. He told me once that he never thought he would see justice. He said he was glad someone finally stood up. I told him it was not just me, it was all of us. He said, "Maybe. But you were the one who had the evidence when it mattered." I said, "I just kept the receipts." He laughed. The neighborhood is quieter now. The rules are still there, but they are enforced fairly. The board is elected by people who care. The management company is professional. The fines are reasonable. The notices are accurate. And when someone new moves in, they get the welcome packet. They get the story. They get the county report. They get the message: this is a neighborhood that fought back and won. I still check my doorbell camera. I still keep the USB drives in my truck. I still have the evidence binder in the attic. But I have not needed them in years. And that is the best revenge. Glad you stayed for the whole story.